organization filed the same case like yours to ICC?
No, there's been, I understand there's been two other communications filed in relation to Cambodia. One several years ago and one also last year. There is some overlap between the other one that was filed last year and this one. That one also deals with some of the same issues. It also deals with some separate issues. There hasn't been one that really focuses on this collection of crimes, which is really this combination of crimes pursuant to the persecution of dissidents, the murders of trade union leaders, putting in prison opposition politicians, killing of Chukvuti, all these people that they kill, who they consider to be challenging their power. There hasn't been a case that collects all these examples and links them to the other crimes relating to land. And really, if you think about it, one is dependent on the other, because the ultimate aim of the ruling elite is to stay in power and to steal as many resources as they can. But to steal resources, you've got to be in power. So they crush any dissent in order to maintain absolute power, in order to steal the resources. So it's all part and parcel of the same illegal system. And there hasn't been a case which ties all that together in the same way. Even though we're very happy that there was another communication last year, and I worked quite closely with the lawyer who filed that, Morten Sklar, and we'll continue to work closely together.
អ្នកនោះដាក់ចឹងទៅប៉ុន្តែតាមពិតតាមប្រសាសន៍របស់គាត់ដោយបងប្អូនបានជ្រាបហើយគឺថា pending case ហ្នឹងមានតែ2ទេមួយគឺរបស់លោក Morten Sklar ហើយនឹងមួយគឺរបស់លោក Richard Roger ផ្ទាល់នេះប៉ុន្តែអ្វីដែលសំខាន់ដែលគាត់ចង់បញ្ជាក់ហ្នឹងគឺថាពាក្យបណ្ដឹងទាំងអស់នោះមិនបានគាត់ចង់និយាយពាក្យបណ្ដឹងរបស់គាត់នេះគឺការប្រមូលផ្ដុំនៅបទឧក្រិដ្ឋទាំងអស់ឲ្យមកចូលនៅក្នុងសំណុំរឿងរបស់គាត់នេះតែមួយហើយប្រហែលជារបស់លោក Morten Sklar ក៏ពាក់ព័ន្ធទៅនឹងការរំលោភសិទ្ធិមនុស្សផងដែរដូច្នេះគាត់មានជំនឿថាcase ទាំងពីរនេះនឹងប្រមូលបញ្ចូលគ្នាតែមួយក្រោមពាក្យបណ្ដឹងរបស់គាត់ដោយសារពាក្យបណ្ដឹងរបស់គាត់នេះគាត់ collect ប្រមូលនៅបទឧក្រិដ្ឋកម្មគ្រប់ប្រភេទហើយជាពិសេសផ្ដោតអារម្មណ៍ត្រង់បទឧក្រិដ្ឋត្រង់ដែលមានភ័ស្តុតាងដោយការបាញ់សម្លាប់លោកឈឹកវុធីការចាប់សកម្មជនប្រជាធិបតេយ្យដោយលោកមីសវណ្ណរាលក្ខណៈដាក់គុកអញ្ចឹងទាំងអស់នេះគាត់បានដាក់ចូលនៅក្នុងពាក្យបណ្ដឹងរបស់គាត់ទាំងអស់នេះហើយខ្ញុំគ្រាន់តែសូមបន្ថែមមួយម៉ាត់ទៀតមុននឹងចូលដល់សំណួរមួយទៀតគឺថាអ្វីដែលសំខាន់ដែលគាត់បានកំពុងធ្វើនោះគឺបន្ថែមប្រមូលពាក្យបណ្ដឹងថ្មីព្រោះគាត់បញ្ជាក់ឲ្យថារបបសពថ្ងៃហ្នឹងអត់ទាន់បានបញ្ឈប់ការរំលោភសិទ្ធិមនុស្សហ្នឹងទេគឺនៅតែបន្តដូច្នេះភារកិច្ចរបស់គាត់ហ្នឹងគឺត្រូវប្រមូលភ័ស្តុតាងដើម្បីដាក់បន្ថែមទៅកាន់តុលាការឧក្រិដ្ឋកម្មអន្តរជាតិបន្ថែមទៀតដើម្បីបញ្ចូលចិត្តគេយ៉ាងម៉េចឲ្យគេបើកការស៊ើបអង្កេតបើសិនជាគេការបើកស៊ើបអង្កេតនោះជាជោគជ័យរបស់យើងយ៉ាងធំធេងបាទសូមសំណួរបន្តសូមអរគុណ
It's the most comprehensive document ever written on human rights abuses in Cambodia. It took several months of a small team of specialized lawyers, and it was only possible because of the support of the Cambodian American diaspora who provided the initial funding. So for those of you who donated to the first stage, thank you very much for your contribution. I think it was money well spent. In essence, the communication asked the ICC prosecutor to initiate an investigation into the crimes against humanity against Cambodian civilians. We alleged that the crimes were perpetrated by senior members of the Cambodian government, by senior members of the state security forces, and by government-connected business leaders. This is the group that we refer to collectively as the ruling elite. In the first part of the communication, we outline the context to help the ICC really understand what's going on. We explain how the ruling elite has subjugated and manipulated the Cambodian state apparatus for personal and private gain. In particular, the police, the military, and the legal system. We explain how the ruling elite has maintained power through patronage, through corruption, and through violence. And then we go on to argue that the ruling elite committed crimes against humanity pursuant to those two objectives that I mentioned earlier. Firstly, the self-enrichment, mainly through land grabbing, and secondly, maintaining power at all costs, including the violent suppression of dissent. So the crimes that we included could be categorized in two groups. The first are those stemming from land grabbing. We provided evidence to the ICC that in rural areas at least 4 million hectares of land have been confiscated, most of it illegally, which represents 22% of Cambodia's land area. And of course, while the CPP claim that economic land concessions are vital to economic growth, in reality they have the opposite effect. They don't have good positive social benefits. As I said, the worst problem is the forcible transfer, and 770,000 people have been affected by that. Others who resist have been murdered, illegally imprisoned, or persecuted, and villages have been burnt to the ground, and oftentimes those who are removed are dumped miles away from their former homes in squalid conditions. You may know that the indigenous minority communities have suffered disproportionately, and it's estimated that about half of them, so about 190,000 of them, have been excluded from their ancestral land. And many of those groups have been forced to give up their traditional livelihoods, and their cultures may be lost forever. According to Licado, the NGO who monitors these issues, the situation is getting worse. And they said a new wave of land grabbing has affected 2,246 families in the first 3 months of 2014. They only monitor half the country, so that's at least 5,000 families multiplied by 4 people. That's about 20,000 people affected in the first quarter of 2014. We provide 72 examples where there's been mass land grabbing, victims sometimes in thousands. The second group of crimes relates to those associated with crushing political dissent. As you know, anyone who dares to challenge the corrupt government and its policies is likely to face some form of persecution. The dissidents have been murdered, imprisoned on trumped-up charges, or persecuted for their political beliefs. Over the last 12 years, the victims have included civil society leaders, monks, journalists, lawyers, environmental activists, trade unionists, civilian protesters, and opposition politicians. Human Rights Watch estimated that at least 300 political opponents and critics have been murdered since the 1991 peace accords. The question for the ICC is, do these human rights violations amount to crimes against humanity? And the answer depends on whether we can show that the underlying crimes, such as forcible transfer and murder, were committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population pursuant to a government policy. And we argue very strongly that all the legal elements of the attack have been met. The communication does not ask the prosecutor to investigate any particular individual. At this stage, this early stage, we don't need to do that. But what it does do is it recommends that they start by investigating the particular police, military or gendarme units who carried out the forcible transfers. And we urge the ICC to investigate the responsibility of the ultimate military and civilian commanders who have power over those units. Now, of course, you appreciate that the ICC's prosecutorial policy is to focus on those who bear the greatest responsibility, and no one is exempt due to their official position. So even heads of state can be targeted, and indeed in countries like Sudan, Kenya, Libya, the ICC has targeted the heads of state. But we need to be realistic. The ICC cannot investigate all international crimes on the planet. It has limited resources, so it has to select its cases carefully. What we need to do collectively is to persuade the ICC that Cambodia is a case that it needs to take on. It is important. So the prosecutor must decide now whether there were crimes against humanity, whether they were serious enough to justify ICC action, and this process can take some time. There is no time limit that they have to follow, but we expect them to make an initial decision sometime this year. Now, we might find that they ask for more information or evidence. We might find that they dismiss it completely. Or we might find that they decide that it deserves to go to the next stage, and that next stage is when they ask the pre-trial chamber to open a formal investigation. If we get to that stage, even the preliminary examination stage, it will be a huge victory for all of us. The ruling elite have enjoyed absolute impunity for the last 30 years, and they've committed a massive number of crimes. If the ICC were to open a preliminary examination, they would suddenly realise that the eyes of international justice are upon them, and they would be forced to change their policies or potentially to face indictments at a later date.